Words. Words break reality into pieces, creating illusions of isolated things out of an actual singularity. Ideas behind words take on a significance of their own. Volume 5 pieces expose words and ideas as artificial, to reveal the interrelated oneness, which is the essence of the reality you encounter. Enlightenment. That's something you're seeking, or you wouldn't be watching these videos. Doesn't it make sense to understand exactly what that word means? The Essence of Reality explores how the psyche which you are creates the reality you encounter. So, heads up, you found the Essence of Reality, an exclusive look at how life actually works. Here you come to see beyond standard thinking, to begin to recognize how you attract life events and relationships and thus create your own life. It's all about awareness of how life actually functions, and that is only ever diminished by beliefs and common notions. Well, we do have much to cover to sort through life's illusions, so enjoy this issue and explore other episodes. The term enlightenment is jostled about quite a bit in various genres: spirituality, consciousness, philosophy, New Age, Eastern mysticism. But what does enlightenment mean, and how do you know when you have it? Clarifying those two queries can take you at some distance toward that state of mind. On the other hand, not grasping clearly what enlightenment designates will do much to keep you from attaining it. Tom Nair here. I speak from a unique standpoint. I've spent years clearing away deceiving ideas to achieve what I call clear awareness. Life works well when you see that you alone drive yours. So these videos are intended only to help you to see how life actually works. And indeed, it is precisely that recognition of life's real function that constitutes more or less enlightenment. But that loose designator, more or less, is actually the operative phrase here. Many a person over the centuries has deemed himself or herself as enlightened when only attaining a slightly clearer view of things. The problem inherent to the realm is fairly obvious. When you shed some elements of old thinking to see more clearly, it's fairly obvious to you that you are more perceptive than before. This improved state can seem like the epitome of awareness. After all, the only thing you really have to compare to is your previous state of consciousness. But there are distinct levels of enlightenment, albeit with no real dividing lines between them. This is because everybody has a distinctly different path towards greater awareness, and each in turn has customized inner obstacles to work through. Let's first establish just what enlightenment is. Only then can its levels be understood, and only then can hindrances, general ones and your own specific ones, be recognized. In general, traveling along on any journey, if you don't see a hazard on the way, you can't react to it. If you don't react, your progress will be in jeopardy. I recall years ago hiking in the Joshua Tree National Park, or Monument as it was back in 1981 when I was first there. I spent a day out hiking in the backcountry over terrain fairly flat, but with occasional outcrops of boulders. These huge rocks had any soil between them long since eroded, so they stood out as heaps of boulders. But the level areas were punctuated by desert washes where the sandy topsoil was eroded ever deeper at each heavy rain, that sort of gouged between the dry creek beds, maybe 6 or 8 feet deep, with sharp drop-offs at the edges. As you walked along, though, surrounded by consistent scattering of cacti and scruffy desert bushes, you easily could come across a sudden drop-off down to a scoured canyon and not see it. You really had to pay attention as you walked along to avoid disaster. The inner journey is not unlike that hazard until you see limitations within your mindset that inhibit your view of things. You can't eliminate them. But sometimes the inner hazard creates the limitation in the first place. So what is enlightenment? I can answer that rather easily, and I will. But your grasp of the meaning I'm illustrating will be limited by beliefs and declarations you may hold as definitive. It's exactly those established notions held as true in your belief structure that not only deter your awareness, but simultaneously keep you from clearing away the restriction they form to your understanding. In this existence, you are a conscious entity, engaging in a lifetime, an incarnation. The quality of the life you are engaging is reflective of your own nature. That is, you are innately connected to the events and relationships you encounter. Whether you recognize it or not, you are intimately connected to all that you run into in life. Let me restate that. You and the seemingly distant world of objects and people you engage are a oneness. Nothing happens to you out of chance. Indeed, nothing happens to you that is powered by any other source. Again, whether or not you perceive that connection, it is operative and causal in your life. Enlightenment is seeing that clearly, that inviolable connection between self and real life. What keeps you from fully recognizing that inner-outer connection driving your life? Established beliefs that you've absorbed since as long as you can remember. No, actually longer. You learned that your parents controlled the show, but that God or bacteria or threatening people or conditions could do harm to you. You learned that no matter how careful you were, you could get hurt physically or emotionally. But the really tricky part is that your lessons as to how life worked were even more deeply drilled into your mind. Parents treated you with authority, and that powerless position you were in as a child was later transferred to teachers and ultimately to bosses and a spouse. That is, your impression of the world, how it works, and how you fit into it were formed not only by things told to you, by lessons, by dogma and myth promulgated by religions, by cultural agreement and common shared knowledge, but your impression of your nature and that of your environment was built by encountered behavior as well as definitions you were taught, and a host of camouflaged assumptions that lay behind your childhood schooling and indoctrination. All of those factors, learning, indoctrination into religion, default to science, parental and peer treatment, all of them combine to formulate your view of the world. And in modern times, in Western culture, all of those factors combine into a self-image and a worldview that indicate falsely that you are separate and apart from the world, that you have to manipulate it, control it in any way you can to get it to work right for you. Tenets to that end are built into your mindset over early phases through childhood, teen years, and onward. And due to the timeless, moment-centered focus of the subconscious, all such notions of your separate nature from encountered reality will remain fixed in your mindset, that is, until you remove them. So enlightenment is seeing the oneness of things clearly. Pretty straightforward, huh? But hindering that awareness is a plethora of ideas, rules, facts, definitions, beliefs, lessons, assumptions, and such that populate your underlying deeper self. This means that to gain enlightenment, one can start to chip away and must start to chip away at the limiting beliefs, see through religion, for example, and drop its often silly and always artificial tenets. As you do that, you begin to see more clearly. At any point in the process, in your journey, you will probably feel more enlightened than prior, and that would be the case actually. But very likely some religion-based notion still resides in your deeper subconscious, old ideas, old thoughts. And many others would remain, thoughts of luck or chance, accident, and oppression by wealthy classes, things like that. So, coming to see very clearly the nature of consciousness as innately connected to reality requires a thorough purge of the psyche's store of falsehoods. And that takes quite a journey. A lot of people get a fleeting glimpse of that oneness, based, say, on a mystical experience, or on following a guru's teachings. This appears to them to be the ultimate, so they go off teaching the same stuff. But I say here, for your edification and use, pure enlightenment is the total clear awareness of the oneness of consciousness and reality, here and now, in real life, in all ways. It isn't an esoteric yearning for other dimensions or higher planes. Perceived spiritual input, communing with the dead, touching some god or other, spouting poetic truths. None of that. It isn't simply accepting a belief as to the oneness. Enlightenment is seeing that oneness clearly, with no competing beliefs and conflicting knowledge to dim the view, as it has been shed along the way. On that pathway to clarity, the messages of great visionaries, past and present, seem enlightened and beyond your level. Doubtless, at that stage they are. But as you grow, following always your own path, clearing away inhibiting notions and competing theories, you will pass even the great ones. You'll know that because at some point you begin to see the limits to their perspectives. About then, you no longer have to ask what enlightenment means. It's all about awareness of how life actually functions, and that is only ever diminished by beliefs and common notions. What does enlightenment mean? And how do you know when you have it? I can answer that, but your grasp of the meaning I'm illustrating will be limited by beliefs and declarations you may hold as definitive. You and the seemingly distant world of objects and people you engage are a oneness. Nothing happens to you out of chance. Indeed, nothing happens to you that is powered by any other source but you. Whether you recognize it or not, you are intimately connected to all that you run into in life. Enlightenment is seeing that connection clearly, that inviolable connection between self and real life. But hindering that awareness is a plethora of ideas, rules, facts, definitions, beliefs, lessons, assumptions, and such that populate your underlying deeper self. So, coming to see very clearly the nature of consciousness as innately connected to reality requires a thorough purge of the psyche's store of falsehoods. And that takes quite a journey. Enlightenment isn't an esoteric yearning for other dimensions or higher planes. Perceived spiritual input, communing with the dead, touching some god or other, spouting poetic truths. None of that. It isn't simply accepting a belief as to the oneness. Enlightenment is seeing that oneness clearly.